Okay, we're back. We're live. We're here, downtown, in the core of downtown Honolulu, in Pioneer Plaza. We're doing ThinkTech today. We do ThinkTech every business day. We broadcast 5 shows every day, and we learn so much from so many people. We are so happy, right, Bill?
Absolutely.
Now, Bill, if you hadn't noticed, is sitting on the guest side of the spectrum today, and I'm sitting on the what? The host side.
The host side, right?
The guest host. And Bill is sitting on the expert side. And he is ordinarily the host of Asia in Review. Today, he's the guest and the expert on Asia in Review. Bill teaches the subject and has been involved in ThinkTech and doing these shows for about 200 years now. So we assume he knows a lot. And we're calling this Asia in Review, China Goes South of the Border, which is very important because the south of the border refers to our south of the border, our Latin America, and that, if you hadn't noticed, is our continent. They're right here, right here south of our border. So what's going on? What are we talking about today? Why don't you define our terms, Bill?
Okay, well, if we could get that map up of the area of Latin America, that might help to focus people's attention. As you can see, it's really still coming into focus there. It's a pretty diverse area, huge actually. It covers 8 million square miles. Okay, of course, it starts with Mexico, runs into Central America, South America, and the Caribbean. And when we put all of that together, that's really Latin America. Obviously, I think it's obviously enough. It's a slightly French-speaking area. There are some areas in South America, Latin America, that speak French, but predominantly Spanish, and of course Portuguese in Brazil.
Which is the biggest country there.
Which is the biggest country, a population of 200 million, which is about, interestingly enough, 1/3 of the population for all Latin America. So Brazil is a huge component to Latin America. Other countries, even like Argentina, are fairly small compared to Brazil.
Okay, so that's Latin America, and just south of our border, lots of it, lots of turmoil in Latin America.
Lots of turmoil.
And a very up and down history with the United States diplomatically, going way back when. Mm-hmm. And it's an area we should be very concerned about because they're our neighbors, they're our continent, they're close by. Okay, so now enter China. How long ago, we'd like to know? We'd like to know why. We'd like to know what they're doing down there.
Okay.
And whether it impinges on American interests.
Well, okay, maybe just a little bit more background about Latin America. It's interesting to me that in days of old, North America was typically referred to as Anglo-America, okay, because it was basically an English-speaking area, Canada and the United States. And Latin America took on that term, not necessarily because it was predominantly Catholic, but because it was an area where the Latin languages were spoken, just as a kind of a point of interest. It seems to me that if you look at Latin America, you look at the United States, there's a lot of commonality in history there. Both were colonies of European powers, okay? The United States got rid of the British late in 1770, starting in 1776, okay? Latin America was followed a little bit later, getting rid of the Spanish with Bolivar and Jose Simon Martinez and some other Latin American revolutionaries. However, it seems that Latin America always kind of lagged behind North America in its development. And I think one of the predominant reasons why was because of this, what some people call a caste system. I never quite thought of it in those terms until recently. But I did think of it in terms of ethnic division. That is, between like those who were of Spanish lineage, okay, those that were Indians, native Indian people, and then mestizos. In other words, what we're calling in Hawaii, hapas, okay? In other words, some Indian, some Spanish, all kind of mixed into one. And because of that, it seems that it's created great divisions in Latin American societies. And I think, from what I can tell, those divisions still go on to this day and probably somewhat hold Latin America back. It's also very interesting to see that, Latin America, for a long time, was a continent full of dictators, okay? And it's only fairly recently that those dictators have been replaced by democratic governments, and some democratic governments more democratic than others. It's pretty hard to call Venezuela a democracy in today's world, I think.
Yeah, we haven't really finished that transition to democracy.
Right.
But you know what, you point out that South America, Latin America, which is founded in large part on European influence,
Exactly.
hasn't done that well economically, in terms of manufacturing, in terms of building infrastructure, building countries. And I think we have to start out with that. And they have an impediment of some kind, whatever it is. And that includes an impediment in finding stable government.
That's a really good point. And I think the one thing is, as I understand the colonial history of Latin America, and I think we can draw some parallels to the Philippines, because the Philippines for, is it 400 years, maybe more, I have to check the records right now, but it was a Spanish colony. And the Spanish were after land, right? They're after these huge haciendas. That was their idea of how to run society, all based on land, okay, and land ownership. And I think, if you look at countries in South America, they're very much like that. They still have that influence today. And I think that impeded industrialization.
Well, I think that's true. I think what you said is true. I think the nature of the country specifically that colonized a given place leaves a huge imprint on it.
Sure.
I mean, the U.S. And the imprint can flower. I mean, it goes way beyond the 13 colonies. It had an impact. The British had an impact still today.
Right.
They made our culture originally.
Right.
So you can see that was a good thing, relatively speaking. The Spanish, they were not good colonialists.
That's a good point.
And they didn't, the British made India, and they brought a great bureaucracy. They created democracy. That's, they made India into a kind of reflection of their own way of doing things, and it was okay. It was okay. But where the Spanish went, they didn't do very well at being colonialists. And they, as you say, they're interested in land and maybe taking resources out, but not interested in creating gold, not interested so much in creating a country to leave behind. And you can look at other European countries that have settled in certain places, and they all leave their character behind as a specific kind of colonialism. It's not the same.
I think it's especially true with the Spanish and Portuguese, too. They were not only interested in land, but they're also very interested in spreading Catholicism.
They're also fairly brutal on the people.
Fairly brutal on the people.
They killed a lot of people for no reason.
That's true. And then I think if you look at, like the western part of Latin America today, that's where you have the Andes Mountains, and a lot of people live in the mountains. You have like societies that are fairly divided. And all of these countries are different. I think that we tend to take a quick look at them and say, oh, yeah, well, Latin America is Latin America. It could be Argentina. It could be Ecuador. It's all the same. These are very different countries. And they don't always, get along so well with each other either. Historically, there have been fights like between Chile and Peru over borders and that sort of thing. But even in today's world, they have very different ideas of how to go about economic development. Now, to me, Chile is perhaps the most advanced country in Latin America. Okay, and I think it's the most corrupt-free country too. I talked to people from, I was on a flight once from Buenos Aires to Santiago, Chile. I was sitting next to this Argentine guy, and he was saying, gee, you know, I really admire Chile. And I said, well, you know, well, why is that? He said, you know, because you can trust the police there. The police don't have their hand out. In Argentina, it's a totally different story. And I think that's pretty true across South America. I mean, Chile is a very forward-looking economic country with great resources. Not that many people, 10 or 11 million people, if I recall correctly. But it's clearly leading, in my view anyway, it's leading South America.
So how do you explain that?
It seems to me it has fairly enlightened government. I mean, it went through a very tumultuous period, right? You know, violent overthrow of the president back in the 70s. Then, you know, pretty brutal dictatorship, General Pinochet. And then there was a turn towards democracy. It's a very active player in the World Trade Organization. It's very interested in the TPP, which we talk about on the show from time to time. Other countries are just not quite as, in my view, as advanced as Chile. Another country which seems to me to be pretty advanced is Uruguay. But overall, just to lay a little background on Latin America, it is, you know, there's great disparities in wealth. It has some of the highest Gini coefficients in the world. In other words, you know, the greatest disparities between the haves and the have-nots, and that's certainly holding back South America. I think in the long run, perhaps Brazil is a bit of a disappointment. I mean, in one way, I've been hearing my whole life that Brazil is like a superpower to be, but I really don't see it happening. Yeah, I know Brazil has a reasonable amount of industry, a population of 200 million people. It's got some financial centers, but it's got a lot of problems too that hold it back. One of them is this great disparity in wealth. I remember, I think it was back in like the 4th grade, they built Brasilia, and this is supposed to be, that's when the capital was moved from Rio de Janeiro inland to Brasilia, because this was going to be a new town in the hinterland of Brasilia, and this was going to represent the dynamic future of Brazil's future. I'm not really sure that that's happened. And people that I talk to who spend a lot of time in South America and Brazil, they suggest the same thing.
We're going to take a short break, Bill.
Okay.
Brazil is part of that acronym of countries, developing countries.
BRICS.
The BRICS.
BRICS.
Yeah. And I think it's really interesting to discuss not only the relative importance, but the relationship of the BRIC countries.
Okay.
And I also, I also think we're going to talk about resources.
Sure.
And what makes them attractive.
Okay.
But you know, just from this discussion so far, I get a sense of why haven't they done better? We would be so much happier. We, the United States, would be so much happier if they had done better. We tried the Organization of American States. We paid a lot of attention to Latin America for a long time, and it really maybe we didn't do it right. Maybe that's clear. Mm-hmm. But what we have now is not what we wanted.
Right.
Let's take a short break. That's Bill Sharp. He's the regular host of Asia in Review, and he's my guest today on a discussion of China going south of the border, here on Asia in Review.
Inspired by an ancient culture, classical Chinese dance, vigorous physicality, timeless stories, 5,000 years of Chinese music and dance, Shen Yun presents authentic Chinese culture. Coming to Blaisdell Concert Hall, May 8th and 9th. Tickets at shenyun.com or call 808-792-3919.
Aloha, my name is Paul Jackson, better known as PJ, and my local interest is in sports. I have my own sports radio show, at KWAI AM 1080 that you can stream live. I also have my own website, pjsportsradio.com. We have live guests in studio, and we talk about discussions and topics that everyone wants to know locally here on the islands. We cover everything from surfing to basketball to whatever's going on locally, sports-wise. We try to do our best and cover the topics in depth as much as we can. Once again, thank you for joining PJ here on Hawaii Sports Update. Mahalo.
We're back, we're live, we're here with Bill Sharp. He's the regular host of Asia in Review, and I'm the guest host today, and he's my guest. Is that confusing? Never mind. Here on Asia Review, we're talking about China and how it's going south of the border. And as I was saying before, you know, I get the sense that, you know, Latin America really could have done, over the last 100, 200 years, could have done better. And we tried. The U.S. tried in its own way, but I think maybe we manipulated, you know, remember those stories about the CIA back in the 50s and the 60s and how they were trying to manipulate governments. That wasn't so good. I don't think we did a real good job as, you know, a northern neighbor, if you will. Mm-hmm. And here we are now. You know, you can't say it's safe down there. You can't, you know, a lot of drugs down there, a lot of violence down, a lot of faulty governments. As you say, disparity is everywhere in wealth. It's not a happy place. I really wish it were a happy place. It's our backyard. Why can't I take my wife, you know, any place in South America and have a wonderful time? I have to do my homework. I have to make sure that it's safe and the food's good and all that. You know, don't drink the water. Anyway, you were talking about a trip you made to, where was it?
Well, yeah, just to kind of finish up some of our background to the area, I remember we visited Peru and Chile in 2006. And on the airport in Lima, from the airport in Lima to downtown, actually to the part of Lima where our hotel was, I don't know, it was about like a 25-minute ride, I guess. And the guide from the travel agency who picked us up there, as we were, you know, headed toward the hotel, they told us, okay, lean down now so nobody can see you. Because apparently on that strip of road, cars, when they stop for a red light, they're, you know, how should we say, assaulted, robbed. And that's a pretty spooky proposition, especially on this road, which is not very well lit. Downtown Lima looks pretty dicey to me. And I've heard that in certain sections of Rio, it's pretty bad too. So you're right, there is a street danger problem. Actually, when we made this trip to South America, we were thinking about going to Brazil. And then one day we were on this tour and we were talking to some folks, I forget exactly where they were from. They told us that a bus that was going from the airport, this time in Rio to downtown Rio, was assaulted by a group of guerrillas. And a number of people were killed. So I guess we're lucky we didn't go to Brazil.
But I remember all the, you know, Copacabana kind of music. And
Yeah.
It was very romantic in the 30s. And we had a lot of people in this country who were stars from not only Brazil, but all over South America.
Right.
I think the relationship, the appeal of the place was much greater at the time. Anyway, so now we've had troubles. We've had diplomatic troubles, we've had military, and we've had drug troubles, and personal security troubles, governmental troubles, you know, so forth. Enter China.
Well, I think that I think that, you know, probably if you remember in the 1980s, there was a huge debt crisis in Latin America. A lot of Latin American countries have borrowed sums of money, mostly, as I understand it, from New York City banks, big New York City banks, and they wanted their money back. And part of the deal was these loans had to be collateralized, right? And then the deal was, if you can't pay back, then your national industries, they become ours. And of course, that was a very unpopular thing in South America. And there was a lot of ill feeling that grew out of that. Then we get into, time goes on, and then it said that during the Bush administration, that is Bush 43, Bush Jr., if you want to call him that, we were so wrapped up with the Middle East, Iraq, Iran, and Afghanistan, that we really took our eyes off most other sections of the world, including, of course, Asia. Asia felt very slighted at the time. Condi Rice didn't go to a lot of important meetings and conferences that were held in Asia at that time. And it sort of gave China an opportunity to kind of look around, well, and let's see what's going on out there. You know, the Americans are not, paying much attention. We got a couple opportunities. And of course, China is always looking for natural resources. Anywhere, Chinese foreign policy is heavily propelled by this desire to have secure access to natural resources. And of course, Latin America offers a lot of that. I mean, look at the copper deposits in Chile, for example. And certainly Chile is not the only country with
The
natural
iron ore in
resources.
Brazil.
Iron ore, okay? I mean, like a lot of third world countries, or in some cases, I'm not sure you can call every country in Latin America a third world, but certainly there are some. But these areas typically have large deposits of natural resources. The exact thing that China is going after, and China became very interested in that. Also, it's an area to build markets for Chinese exports. And that sort of thing. So we look at, I believe the statistic is 92% of all exports from Latin America to China are in one form or another a natural resource. Going the other way, there's also some soybeans and some agricultural products. But going the other way from China to Latin America, it's usually like things like machinery or that sort of thing. And also a lot of textiles and a lot of clothing. I can remember being in like Santiago, and I sort of like to check out clothing stores. Everything I see is made in China, right? And talking to some of the the owners and clerks in the store, I said, well, don't you have like Chilean-made products here? So no, everything's from China. Of course, I think their national pride was a little bit hurt because of that, but at that time, Chinese stuff was selling pretty well. Yeah, so I think that they see, that is, China sees Latin America as a source of natural resources and also a market. And
How long they've been doing that?
well, let me see.
They became the world's manufacturer.
Yeah.
What, in the 80s?
In the 80s, China
Deng
opened to the
Xiaoping.
world in '78, and I think you'd say at least from the '90s. Okay, they really got things going. It probably is important to point out that there have been Chinese communities in Latin America for quite some time. I've seen a reasonable number of like Chinese restaurants and therefore Chinese in Mexico City. There are a lot of little Chinese restaurants around Peru. Lima has a fairly big Chinatown. I mean, I know in Brazil, a lot of people, when China in 1949 was, the nationalists were getting overturned, a certain number of people left China and went to Brazil. So there have been Chinese communities, Panama is another good example. There have been Chinese communities in various parts of Latin America for some time, but the real onrush of mainland People's Republic of Chinese influence started, I'm going to say 1990.
Okay, so what you have is, first you have the existing Chinatown type communities.
Right.
With restaurants and a small group Chinese people.
Right.
And that goes way back.
Right.
That probably goes back, early 20th century.
Yeah, I think that a lot of that started about the same time the Chinese first came to the United States.
Well, that'd be
working
1850.
working on the Trans-Pacific Railroad and that kind of stuff.
Okay, 19th century. Then.
Right.
So, okay, then you have the manufacturing.
Right.
That when they realize that they can be the world's factory,
Right.
they're sending all kinds of goods everywhere, cheaper
Right.
than that the local countries can make them.
Right.
And then finally, I think they become aware, somewhere along the line, that there are resources.
Right.
And they can buy the resources and ship the resources out of the country. And then there's one more step. They realize that they can move or establish factories in these developing countries, and manufacture things, A, for the developing countries, but also to export elsewhere.
Right, good point.
Movable factories, if you will.
Okay, that's a good point.
So it sounds like they've done that all over Latin America.
Right, right. I think that's true. Now, you know, in some cases, I read the situations in Mexico, for example, where there's been some friction between Mexico and China in the sense that a lot of Mexicans feel that, you know, China has sort of actually hurt them economically because of the cheap products. Certain products that Mexico made, but China made cheaper, has hurt Mexican manufacturers. So there's a little, at least there has been some friction there. To what degree that still exists, I'm not quite sure, but it doesn't seem that Mexico's relations with China are quite what, you know, some other countries in the region are. Clearly, Venezuela has a very close relationship with China, and Venezuela is a huge oil producer, right? It also has a type of government that China has no trouble in dealing with, totalitarian government. Democratic in name, but I think the nature of Venezuelan democracy is being diluted as we speak. China has no problems in dealing with that. It deals with Robert Mugabe of, Zimbabwe. Had a senior moment there for a second.
Well, you know, but I think something you're pointing out, or at least implied in what you're pointing out, is that China is business.
It's business.
They're not there to do, you know, like a lot of U.S., what do you call it, NGOs around the world are there, and religious groups are there, and Doctors Without Borders kinds of, you know, nonprofits are there to help the local people. They're not there for business. They're not there to make a buck at all. But when China goes somewhere, and I think in recent years, both for extracting the raw materials, the resources, and for building factories and other businesses in these developing countries, it's strictly business. And I think you will find that especially in Africa and South America, you'll find that sometimes there is an irritation because maybe the country had some other expectations that the Chinese would help them out in one way or another, didn't come true. So there's a set of failed expectations that creates a friction.
I think that's a good point because I think that similar to what you see in Africa is that African countries are sort of, at least in the long term, we'll see how this pans out, but at least for the short term, sort of like, well, okay, we're like, you know, we've been dealing with you Americans and Europeans for quite some time, and we're not quite getting everything we want. Maybe we can get it from China. But I think, as you're suggesting, China's, it's not worried about doing good, you know, as a lot of NGOs are. And I think a lot of American policy is driven not only by economic and security and strategic concerns, but also by this idea of doing good. China it's not like that. It's like, it's business, you know, money on the barrelhead kind of thing. And how long, you know, whether in the long term South Americans, Latin Americans will tolerate that. I guess we have to just wait and see.
But I would say that it's sort of like where the Chinese are buying, you know, U.S. paper, U.S. obligations.
Right.
They must be doing similar things in these other countries.
Sure.
Because they want the country to, you know, have a connection, have a dependency on
Right. That's exactly true. I think that a lot of ways that China plays things, I think this is a very Asian thing, is they're willing to do all kinds of good things up front. And that creates, as you're saying, dependency. It also creates, in their view, in their mindset, a sense of obligation. Well, we did all this for you. Now it's time to start reeling it back in and, you know, getting reciprocity.
Yeah, it's a long-term strategy. Yeah.
Personally, I think you can see this in social relations between Chinese people and other Asian people. This is
Sure,
Asian
it's cultural.
culture.
It's cultural.
It's not limited to Korea, Japan, or China, or Taiwan. It's Asian.
You know, and there's the whole thing about culture is it affects ThinkTech, because ThinkTech, we have a culture of taking a break every few minutes. So we're gonna express our culture now. That's Bill Sharp. He's the host of Asia in Review. Today he's my guest and I'm being the guest host. And we're talking about China and how it's going south of the border into Latin America here, on Asia in Review. We'll be right back.
Hi, my name is Seymour Kazimirski. I have a show called Seymour's World on ThinkTech Hawaii. Our show is about opening minds and facilitating conversations. To tell you the truth, I have no idea what we're going to be talking about. I have no idea who our guests are going to be, but I guarantee you we're going to have lots and lots of fun. Aloha from Seymour's World.
Hi, my name is Andrew Howard. I'm an astronomer at the Institute for Astronomy at the University of Hawaii up in Manoa. I'd like to tell you about the annual open house that we're having. This year it is on April 6th, 11 to 4 p.m. It's an all ages event, kids, grown-ups, even people in between, everyone is welcome. We have a lot of really fun activities. You get to meet astronomers, look at yourself in an infrared camera, play with Legos, make robots, look at videos. You can even make some of the kids like to make comets out of gravel and snow. Even adults like to do that too. You'll be able to look at the sun with a solar camera safely. It's really a great activity. We do this every year in April, and I hope to see you this year. Thanks.
Aloha, I'm Hunter Hevlin, host of Sustainable Hawaii here at ThinkTech Hawaii. You can tune in every week on Thursday at 2 p.m. to see interviews with sustainability professionals from around the state and even further abroad, learning about activities with water management, food security, waste management, and a whole host of other fascinating opportunities to get engaged with making a greener island. So if you're interested in making the transition from consuming individuals to communities of producers, check us out every Thursday.
Okay, we're back. We're live. We're here with Bill Sharp, host of Asia in Review, and we're talking about China and how it is going south of the border into Latin America here on Asia in Review. So, you know, Bill, it seems like it's an easy job for China to go south of the border because the U.S. has not paid attention, not had good foreign policy in South America and Latin America, and it leaves a vacuum which they can easily fulfill. Is that what's happening?
Well, I think that probably we've taken Latin America a little bit too much for granted over the years. China has certainly been doing its homework. It has observer status in the Organization of American States. It's a charter member of the Inter-American Development Bank. It's really, I don't know, it's been pretty astute in what it's done. And, you know, certain countries, we talked about Venezuela before the break, but I think, you know, Argentina is an interesting case too. Argentina in the 30s, this is the 7th most wealthy country in the world. And then due to a lot of bad politics, bad economic decisions, it certainly has fallen way off the mark. And it is needed, you know, capital from abroad on numerous occasions. And it's a little bit like Greece. They had a lot of trouble paying them back. The 1980s, I think, was a pretty hard time for Argentina. It wanted more money from the West, particularly the United States. The West wasn't very forthcoming. They had sort of gotten lost out on some loans before. And Argentina seems to have taken on this view, well, hey, forget the West, we don't need the rest. And then China's looking for friends from other places, and Argentina's, it's available, right? I just kind of wonder how far that relationship between Argentina and China is going to go, because, you know, the Greeks, the Chinese are very hesitant to finance a lot of Greek debt, because I think they see the poor credit history that Greece has.
The Russians will do it, thank you very much.
Yeah, well,
they are doing it.
With what? I'm not quite sure, but, I mean, Argentina has this, you know, it feels so slighted, and it seems to me to be fairly unjustified. Yeah, and other countries in Latin America, I think to one degree or another, sort of have that idea as well. Yeah, interesting.
So we left a vacuum, and they're filling the vacuum.
Yeah.
And they have a modus operandi where they go in there and they invest, and they yield economic activity for a country that needs economic activity.
Right.
And everybody likes that.
Right.
So they become, you know, a positive business influence, a phenomenon
Right.
in the country. And little by little, and this is not accidental, and it's not just a bunch of businessmen. It's the Chinese government who is calling the shots on this. Am I right?
Because the Chinese government is the major stockholder in all major Chinese companies.
Right.
Yeah. You know, it's you know interesting too when you talk about like where did the U.S. Make mistakes in its policy towards Latin America. Well, frankly, personally, myself, I think that we should have recognized Cuba a long time ago, because Cuba, you know, it's in for all kinds of reasons. First of all, American business can make a lot of money in Cuba easily. It's 90 miles off our shore. It's a potential security threat to the United States, as we saw during the Cuban Missile Crisis. We have more Russian activity there now, if only symbolic. China has listening posts in Cuba, so they can, you know, eavesdrop on American security.
Really?
Yeah, American strategic communications. We certainly don't want
I
that.
thought we were going to reestablish our relations with them.
Well-
Listening posts are not consistent with that.
Perhaps we will negotiate to get rid of those in the future, but to the best of my knowledge, they're still there. We have Chinese oil companies drilling off of the westernmost end of Cuba, very close to Florida. And you know, the other thing is, the other side of the coin is, Latin American countries might not like Cuba's politics, but they see it as a Latin American country that has been slighted by the United States. You know, this embargo against goods to Cuba, that hurts Cuban people, right? It doesn't hurt Castro. Just like you can have sanctions against North Korea and Kim Jong-un is not worried about where his next meal is coming from. And I think by recognizing Cuba, it will help us to up our relationship with all of Latin
It's
America.
not going that well, though, is it?
It's being
They're
bumpy.
arguing. They're
arguing.
fighting with us, and we're fighting with them. And you know, all the noble idea of recognizing them seems to have passed.
I hope that we can work that out, because it seems to me, you know, people in Cuba, they think about the United States. They don't think about China. And those Cuban Americans in Florida, I mean, they're certainly thinking about what's going on in Cuba. It makes a lot of sense to do what we can to improve relationship with Cuba.
But it's, as you said, it's symbolic.
It's symbolic.
And every single country in Latin America looks at Cuba as somebody, as an underdog.
That's right.
That-
Exactly
that
right.
we've beaten up, and,
That's
and
right.
they feel they're also underdogs.
It's exactly right.
And,
Even though they probably detest Castro just as much as we do.
Yeah.
They detest the regime there. The regime, it's got to remind them of the days of Pinochet and some other tyrants that were running various
Let me
South
suggest
American
a lot of
countries.
these dictators and these failed governments in South America are because they could not establish real relations with the U.S. because they were abandoned in some way. And we could have helped them, but we didn't help them. And so it's kind of a fragmented place.
Well, I think there's probably, I would put it this way. I think that probably during the height of the Cold War, especially when, you know, the Soviet Union was looking for influence wherever it could find it, especially in the Third World, and Latin America was basically considered the Third World. We were probably pretty happy to have dictators there, because dictators usually play the U.S. game, right?
Sure, you can pick up the phone and tell them what to do.
Right. When the threat goes away, the Soviet Union dissolves, well, let's talk about getting rid of those guys and putting in democratic governments. So, I mean, you know, I think that the Brent Scowcroft view of foreign relations is stability should be priority number one, and democracy can kind of come second. You know, when I look at places in the Middle East, I think that, you know, that's not a bad philosophy. The Arab Spring is a total flop as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. Well, are we going to lose ground here? We have a few minutes left, but I would like to ask you this. Are we going to lose ground in Latin America? The Chinese are, little by little, like we've had other discussions about other countries
Right.
where the Chinese have come in and, you know, begun to sort of, exert their influence in
Right.
the country at our expense, at the U.S.'s expense. Where we don't do it right, they do it right. Is that happening in South America? Is that going to continue to happen?
Well, the good news is that the U.S. is still the major economic player in South America. It's still the biggest investor. It still has the largest trade flows with South American countries. And you know what? I think there's another card here that the U.S. has in its hand. The cultural similarities between the United States and South America are greater than the cultural similarities between South America, any South American country, and China. There's huge
we have
cultural distance.
We
between
have
the
many
two.
tens of millions of Latinos in
Right.
our country, and they are part of the fabric of our country.
As you said in the beginning, we are both the offspring of Western civilization, of European societies, and that, I think, draws us closer together. You know, I remember when I was at Beijing Foreign Language University as 5 or 6 years ago, taking this course there, and there was a contingent of students from Venezuela, because of this burgeoning relationship between Venezuela and China, and they were all studying Chinese. And this one Venezuelan guy one time, he sort of looking around, make sure nobody's looking, he said, hey, we're here to study Chinese, but do you think you could teach me English? Because in his mind, English, and I think America was probably more important to him than was Chinese and China. I do want to say one thing too. In Central America, Taiwan has diplomatic relations with several countries in Central America, and it's very interesting. Taiwan's foreign aid program is very small, but it's very effective. And there are countries like Nicaragua is the best example. Daniel Ortega. He really. I mean, he's kind of fond of China, the People's Republic of China. But why doesn't he change relations? Why doesn't he, recognize China rather than Taiwan? Because the Taiwan aid program is so geared to Nicaragua's needs and has been so helpful to it. I think it's a real feather in the cap to Taiwan's small but highly effective foreign aid program.
Well, it certainly sounds like the U.S., we talk about how the pivot, we were distracted from the pivot.
Right.
We were pivoting to Asia in the early days of the Obama administration, and then we forgot to do that. We got involved in Central Asia and all that, and now we're distracted so many ways. And so the pivot has not been what it was supposed to be. On the thought that, and this is my point, that you can't have a diplomatic initiative in more than one region at a time. That nationally you've got to focus on one region. I don't really accept that. Do you accept that? Because we are doing Central Asia, in the Middle East, doesn't mean we can't also pay attention to Asia. And that doesn't mean that we can't also pay attention to Latin America. We have to pay attention to all these places.
I think that's absolutely true. If the U.S. is to maintain its leadership in the world and its position in the world, then it just can't focus on one region. We have to focus on all regions, because all regions are important.
Let that be the lesson of the day. Bill Sharp, host of Asia in Review, here on Asia in Review, where I'm his guest host. We've been talking about China going south of the border into Latin America. Very interesting discussion. Thank you, Bill.
You're welcome. Thank you.